Okay, everyone. So welcome. My name is Michael Santori. I see many familiar faces and names, and I'm with Today's American Catholic, and we're very pleased to have Dr. Robert Choiniere joining us from Rome, which is wonderful. I think he has the record for the farthest zoom in of these events we've done. So thank you, Robert, for being with us.
Of
Um,
course.
and everybody, I think we've done enough of these at this point. People kind of know the routine. If as I mentioned, if you could kindly stay muted, we will have some time for Q&A at the end. We'll do about, 30 to 40 minutes of questions with Robert about Ignatian Encounter Ministry. And we'll hopefully open the floor up for some discussion afterwards. So without further ado, Robert, welcome and thank you for joining
Thank you.
us today.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. It's good to see
So,
some familiar faces too.
yes, we have some good organizational overlap here. So thank you everybody for making time this afternoon. I know we're on kind of a global time calendar, so we usually do these a little later, but this is great to kind of have it in the afternoon hour. So hopefully more people can join. Um, so Robert, if we could maybe begin, you're in Rome, so I'd love to, since this is kind of a special thing for us, if you could talk to us about what brought you there, what you're seeing on the ground there, if you've had the opportunity to dialogue with folks about the synod. I know there was a press conference this morning about some study group Pope Francis is forming. So anything you'd like to share about, what you're seeing out there would be great.
Yeah, sure. So I came in, I'm just here for about 10 days, and I was invited to come through a really exciting program called the Discerning Leadership Program. I'm a part of their accompaniment team. And I think it's really important for folks in the States who might not be aware of the Discerning Leadership Program. It's run by a Jesuit by the name of Father D.Min, who's been very active in the Synod as well. Father David runs this organization that provides leadership formation to high-ranking officials within the Catholic Church all over the world, both here at the dicasteries in the Vatican, as well as heads of religious orders, both that are stationed here in Rome, international orders, and throughout the world as well. And they're really training church leaders in synodal leadership formation, how to act as leaders. And, they get dropped into these positions in Rome. They're elected by their orders, and they're kind of swimming in the dark here when they come in. They've been put in charge and have this huge responsibility. So this provides them not only with some training in some real synodal practices and how to be a leader, but also provides them with coaches and an accompaniment process of which I'm a part, who sort of walk with them throughout their tenure and help them and give them advice as they develop their counsels and seek consultation with others. So this is really a worldwide phenomenon right now. I'm one of 50 accompaniers that are walking with people. And right now we've come together to talk about the future of this organization and how they can continue this work throughout the world. So it's really exciting. I was saying earlier that we just had a conversation with Sister Nathalie. She had just gotten back from the United States this morning. She went to the press conference you were talking about, and she came directly here to meet with our group to talk about the work that she's been about. So it's been a pretty exciting time.
Wow, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. Maybe you could just mention, I know as part of your background before you started Ignatian Encounter Ministry, did you do a sabbatical at the Pontifical Gregorian University studying synodality? Is
Yeah, so
some
it's sort of a
time there?
long story. Yeah.
Okay.
So I was really involved, and we can maybe talk about this a little bit more. I was really involved in the local consultation process of the synod by providing these online facilitator trainings and conversation in the spirit to really help have better conversations in parishes throughout the United States. After that time, I really just felt this call to be present to the synod, as you know, Michael, this has really been a part of my background and my career in ministry. And so I felt really deeply called to be present here. So if ever there was a time, now is the time. And I'd been in ministry for about 25 years, believe it or not, I couldn't believe it. And I said, I just want to go be in Rome and study in Rome. It was sort of like my dream since I was a kid. So I enrolled in the Gregorian and took classes with many of the professors and theologians who are really prominent in the synodal movement. And I studied Italian and learned Italian so that I could listen to them and hear what they're saying from a different point of view. And it was a fascinating year to be here and be present during all of that preparation.
Wow. Wow. Amazing. You mentioned a little bit more about your background in ministry, and maybe you could you could just fill us in on some of kind of where you came from when you formed Ignatian Encounter Ministry. I know you've done work in pastoral planning and consultation with churches. And maybe if you could share some things. We're in this synodal moment where it feels like everything's on the table. So I'm curious what you learned in your time in ministry that you brought into your synodal work and are bringing to Ignatian Encounter Ministry. Anything you'd like to share on that front?
Yeah, sure. I feel like I've really been part of synodality for a long time. It's really been the core of my ministry and what I've cared about. I began in Boston College at the School of Ministry. Then it was the Institute of Religious Education, studying pastoral ministry, really with this idea of forming adult leaders in their own faith to really become adult partners with the clergy to help form and shape collaborative relationships. And I was also fortunate to learn community organizing at the Kennedy School at Harvard, and then began to bring these two together to bring in community organizing practices into pastoral ministry and sort of merge them together. My first opportunity to do that was in the Diocese of Wheeling-Charleston, where Debbie is, I believe. That was my first diocese. And I had this wonderful opportunity, which was really to work within a particular vicariate, about 15 parishes along the Ohio River, and really form collaborations among those smaller rural parishes to support one another. It was really interesting. They were very parochial at the time. You know, they were just kind of working within their own communities on the issues that were of concern to them. And we found out when they began to get together and talk to one another that they all shared the same issues. So we said, well, what can we do better together that none of us can do individually? And so we began really listening to people, which really began this synodal process for me, by listening to people and finding out what their concerns were. And by doing that, we formed, for instance, a parish nursing program with the help of the Sisters of St. Joseph, really empowering nurses in their parishes to go out in the community and do triage nursing to help people who don't have access to medical care on a regular basis, to be able to, to check them for small things, but also be able to go in their homes and say, it's really time that you go to the hospital now. Like things as simple as that as walking with people. We also created a lay formation program, and that's really when I got involved in parish pastoral council formation and developing, as I said, this adult partnership between clergy and laity working together for the mission of the church. I took that and then went on to Philadelphia and began to do parish council formation. And there I really helped to develop and form a discernment process for parish pastoral councils. Parish councils had become really political at that time. Through the 80s, they were these elections, and whoever was the most popular became the council members and the people who had the pastor's ear. We really flipped that and began a discernment process that was rooted in the gifts of people. So we asked everyone in the entire parish, who do you feel in your parish has the gifts for leadership? And then they called those people forth into roles of leadership, and the parish themselves, and then those who were nominated, selected from their own number who they felt would be the best pastoral council members. They did that in collaboration with the pastor as well. But we began to show people that there are practices of discernment that are embedded within the scriptures that are really our foundational documents. And simple majority rule, that's really not a basic Christian concept. So we tried to bring in these ideas of discernment. If further, then I went to the Diocese of Brooklyn. Hello, Pat Brinsel from the Diocese of Brooklyn. Pat was involved in the pastoral councils there as well. And there I was invited by the bishop to form parish pastoral councils in every parish in the Diocese of Brooklyn. At that point, there were 218 parishes. So we formed councils in every single one of those parishes and provided them with a process of pastoral planning that was rooted in consultation. In fact, we used one-to-one conversation campaigns that you might know of from community organizing processes that really wound up to entire parish assemblies where everyone in the parish was encouraged to come in to sit at round tables. Sound familiar? They sat at round tables and discussed what's going on in the life of their communities and the life of their parish, and then looked through the lens of the mission of the parish and gave advice and consultation to both the pastor and the council, who developed plans collaboratively on how to live out the mission in their spot of the world. And in many ways, this was synodality before we even had the word synodality.
I was just going to say, it sounds like you were a pre-early adopter. You were like on the vanguard. Yeah, that's really inspiring. Yeah.
Yeah, and I wasn't just me. I didn't invent this myself. There was a whole group of pastoral planners throughout the United States and the Conference of Pastoral Planning and Council Development that were really developing these processes. And I had wonderful mentors who were experimenting and trying new ideas. Half of them were social scientists that were really developing new methods of collecting data that was relevant for parishes, because we wanted to look at the signs of the times in
Mhm.
new ways. And then also these council developers who were really religious educators and adult formation teachers who catechists that were really trying to bring in good principles of adult formation at the same time. And they just sort of met together in the middle and helped to develop these processes.
Yeah, yeah, no, it seems like the pastoral council is a place that a lot of synodal energy can be focused on, and that can be like almost a laboratory of synodality. And this side, people are looking towards renewal of pastoral councils as a great starting point for a more synodal church. So, and I love the idea that you mentioned of the gifts being discerned by the community, not necessarily through a hierarchy, but through the community's recognition of itself. That's really, hopefully, we can kind of keep moving in that direction. Um, I guess moving now we have a really great sense of kind of your background in mission. Maybe we could begin to move into the Ignatian Encounter Ministry, which is your new relatively new, I guess, 2021 organization. And I'll quote the from the mission statement: designed to provide experiences and training in practices of synodality and communal apostolic discernment to individuals and faith communities in the United States and across the world. I like that phrase, communal apostolic discernment. It's got everything there. Could you maybe unpack a little bit about the history and mission of Ignatian Encounter Ministry, how it came about, just how it was, I know, well, maybe we could start there. I know there's some more.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So, well, in 2021, when the Pope announced the synod, I was not in diocesan ministry any longer. I ended my diocesan ministry in 2014 and went on for my doctorate and began teaching and working in parish work. And so the synod came along, and I thought to myself, this is everything that I had been doing for almost 20 years, and suddenly the Pope was really validating a lot of our ministry. And when people said, "Oh, synodality, what is that? It's very confusing," I knew exactly what he was talking about. I had no doubt about it. So I said, "Well, what am I going to do? I just can't sit on the sidelines while the entire church begins to organize itself around these principles that I care about so deeply." So as a good pastoral planner, I sat down and created a strategic plan for myself. And so I had several goals, but the two main goals, one was I thought there's a whole lot of people who are no longer attending Mass, who have left the Catholic Church, and they're not going to read the church bulletin, and they're not going to listen to their bishop, if they even know who their bishop is, to come to a consultative meeting. So I thought, how are we going to reach out to people? So the first thing I did was created a zip code based web search that was called synodmeetings.com. And we focused on every diocesan website in the country, and anytime they posted a meeting, to a synod meeting, we pinged it. We got an email that said this has changed. There's a new meeting update. So we tracked those and then created a zip code search so that you could put in your zip code and find out where a synod meeting was. And then we encouraged people to use their Instagram and Facebook to reach out to their friends and family who were no longer practicing and encourage them to come. But then I thought to myself, well, man, if we get them to come out to a meeting, that's great. But what happens if the meeting is disorganized and confusing and argumentative and polarizing? They're never going to come back.
Right.
So that's when I really thought, well, how can I, sitting on the sidelines, be of help and assistance to at least help people have a good meeting, a productive meeting, and a spiritual meeting. So of course, the spiritual conversation model was talked about in the Vademecum and the synodal documents. So I thought, well, what if we did facilitator trainings that we trained people how to have these conversations in the parishes? And so when people came to the meetings, at least they would have this excellent process
Mhm.
that would be, wouldn't devolve at least into acrimony.
Right.
So I worked with Christian Life Communities, CLC USA and CLC Canada. Now CLC, which is an Ignatian lay organization, have been using these practices of spiritual conversation for a long time. It really is an Ignatian practice, and they are great practitioners of it. And they also want to give this practice away. So here's a natural group of people who are really evangelists for this process. So when I got in touch with them, and I'm a CLC member myself, they said, yes, we'll definitely help. So that really began these digital or virtual facilitator trainings that we first offered in the Diocese of Trenton, because
Okay.
the chancellor was one of my former colleagues in the pastoral planning world. And we trained about 300 people in the Trenton Diocese to have these conversations. It was then that I got in touch with Julia McStrabig at the USCCB Synod office. She came to the Trenton training and she said, wow, could we send this out to the whole country? I think other people would be involved. So, one thing led to another, and we offered national trainings. So we worked in about 20 dioceses and had people sign up. And we trained about 3,000 people in the span of about 6 weeks.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness. I had no idea it was that many. Wow. Wow.
yeah, it was a lot of people, and we did it both in English and in Spanish. So that was what I did in 2021, and then I came to Rome, as you know, and had my sabbatical. And when I went back after the synod, I looked at the synod documents, and it said we need to encourage the rest of the church to have these conversations in the spirit, like we did in Rome. We need to train facilitators all over the world in how to do this process. And we need to use digital means to do that. And I looked at that 1, 2, 3, and I said, well, that's what I was doing in 2021.
Right. Right.
So, so I basically got the band back together and got in touch with a tech company, a Catholic tech company called Sanctified, that was really excited to create this platform. And, one thing led to another, and all of a sudden we have this huge platform now. And it's not only to train facilitators, but we also have the capability to gather together people for virtual conversations as well. So right now we can gather about 700 people in one meeting, and all of those individuals are broken into small groups of 6 or 7 people each. And one of our trained facilitators is in each one of those small groups to guide people and model that conversation. And then we also capture notes. Every single small group is able to report back in. And
Right.
then those notes at the end go back to the host of the meeting. So it's perfect for a synodal consultation. And that's
Yeah.
what we've done recently.
That's amazing. It sounds like it was, yeah, designed perfectly for the format. Maybe actually kind of building on that for people, I'm sure folks are familiar with the idea of spiritual conversation, some of these Ignatian practices, but could you, for people who might not know all the details, talk about what goes on in a meeting like this with a spiritual conversation model, and kind of, you mentioned the facilitator. What is the facilitator's role in holding that space, and just some of the architecture of the conversation, if you could lay out for us?
Yeah, sure. So if you come to one of our conversations, which you can certainly come to next week, I hope we get to plug that in a minute. But when we hold our consultations or conversations, everyone comes together in a large group, and we can hold this because there's no geographic boundaries on the internet, so we can have conversations across the country or even across the world. So I'd like to talk about that a little bit more too at some point, Michael, that we're really able to give people an experience of the universal church beyond the boundaries that any of us really have ever known before there was an internet. So we can bring people into that room and into that space. We give them a question to ponder. There's usually one main question in the first round that everyone has an opportunity to respond to. And we send that to people way ahead of time so that they have time to reflect and think of it. So when they come in, the first part of the conversation is really the fruit of their prayer. After sitting with this question, what is the fruit of your prayer and reflection? And they share that with one another. But before we get to their small groups, we talk about ground rules, that there are rules for this conversation. So in a spiritual conversation, everyone has an opportunity to talk for the same amount of time. Everyone works under the same circumstances. There's no one that's higher than another person or has more authority than anyone else in the conversation. So it's a little bit different in the Catholic world. It's a lateral conversation. So everyone has 5 minutes to speak, or whatever it is. And so we talk about those ground rules. People don't talk over one another. Is very important. And there's a certain level of confidentiality and sacredness to the conversation. We say we want to create safe and sacred spaces for conversation. So we review that with everyone. We then have an Ignatian Examine, where we help people get into a prayerful space to really think through and reflect. In case they haven't had time to go over the question in advance, it gives them an opportunity to focus themselves. And then we go into the small groups. And in the small groups, a spiritual conversation basically has 3 rounds of conversation. The first round of conversation, where everyone has an opportunity to speak, is that primary question. That primary question can change depending on the topic. Really, it can be changed quite a bit, but it usually has to do with someone's story or experience. We want to root the conversations in people's experience of church, not talking about theory and ideas and theology and ideology where we tend to get into argument, but we say everyone is an expert in their own experience. So we
Yes.
ask people to share about their experience of the living God in their own lives. Like the question that we'll have for our synod consultations is, talk about a time when the church structures and institutions helped to facilitate its mission, and a time when the church got in the way of its own mission.
Yes.
And we have people explain that. But then we also follow that up with a future-oriented question. Imagine a way in which the church could more effectively live out its mission. What would that look like?
Right.
So it's a positive, future-oriented question as well. So everyone has an opportunity to answer that question. And then there are these really important moments of silence after that first round, when everyone gets to talk. Silence is really critical. These are spiritual conversations. We believe that the Holy Spirit is present. Whenever 2 or 3 are gathered, the Spirit is there. There I am in their midst. If we just keep talking and talking and talking, we can forget that. There's no room for the Spirit.
Right.
So we actually sit in silence together to let everything that's been spoken sink in, but also to create a little space for the Spirit to get in as well and move people's hearts. The second round of conversation tends to be the most intimate, where people begin to respond to what they heard and what resounded within them, what touched them as they listened to other people speak. This is a really important moment when people do have an opportunity to speak back, but it's really about what touched their heart. Where, the Pope's idea here in a synodal conversation is to break people open in compassion. And so we ask people to listen with a compassionate heart and then speak back to each other. And then more silence. And then the third round is, recognizing that the Holy Spirit really is here, taking that very, very seriously. What is the Holy Spirit trying to say to us through this conversation?
Yes.
One thing that I learned from these theologians at the Gregorian, Dario Vitali in particular, is he said, there's a lot of Catholics that don't believe that Jesus Christ is actually alive. If Jesus Christ is not alive, then this is useless. But we believe that there is a risen Christ who is walking with each of us and with the church. If we really believe that, then we need to find ways to tap into that. And this conversation does just that, takes that very seriously, and says, what is the Spirit of Christ trying to say to us right here, right now in this intimate conversation? And we trust that people can have that conversation, and they can intuit it by the very nature of being a son or daughter of God. And this conversation enables them to do that. At the end of that conversation, we gather notes. So we ask people, where were the points of consensus? Where were the points that we all seem to agree on? And just like this, the synod, where were the points of divergence? Where were the points that we had different points of view, and we're going to honor that. We didn't try to come to a quick solution here. We don't have to always do that. We can have divergent points of view, and we're just going to name both of those. And we're not going to solve that here, but we're going to name it. And then thirdly, how is the Spirit prompting us to move forward? So you can imagine, if all of these small groups, 100 small groups, are having the same conversation, all of those notes are going to go back to the organizer of the conversation. That could be a pastor or a bishop or an executive director or whoever, a head of a ministry, whoever convenes the conversation. And then they really have all of this information on which to base some of their decisions. So it really is trying to invite some participation into our decision-making processes.
No, it's a wonderful system. I love the phrase used, lateral conversation, and kind of appealing to people's experience. And it reminded me, when you were talking about the risen Christ, why the road to Emmaus image has been such a fundamental image with this whole synodal journey, and that you expressed it, I think, very aptly, that that's the guiding image there, is that Christ is there walking amongst the people that are participating, and there's that time for silence to discern what's happening together. So within this interim year of the synod, just to so that people are clear that you're putting together these conversation events, and they're part of the synodal process, or you're sending documents or kind of some of this communal discernment? Is it going to the secretariat or to some people that might incorporate it into the session in 2024?
Yeah, so there's really there's two angles to it, Michael. I think thanks for bringing that up. It's really important. Yes, so the conversation that we're doing next week with New Ways Ministry is a consultation for the synod for the General Assembly in October, this October, and that information will go back to the Vatican Synod Office, to the USCCB, but more importantly, New Ways Ministry, for instance. They have a list of, they ask people what diocese you're from when you come to that consultation. So anyone that attends that meeting, we have a list of the diocese they're from, and all of those bishops get a full report from that consultation, with the idea that, you know, it's really to help them understand the needs and concerns of LGBT Catholics in their diocese. So we're really trying to provide an avenue of consultation to each of those ordinaries. In April, we'll be doing one for the World Union of Catholic Women's Organizations, or what is commonly referred to as WUCWU. And so WUCWU is going to be a truly global conversation. We'll be hosting 800 women on 5 continents and 3 languages on one day in 2 different meetings. They'll be meeting with each other in small groups. So imagine women from multiple countries all together in one small group talking about their experience of being women in the church. And all of that information will go then directly back to the Vatican Synod Office.
Okay.
But that's really only one part of it, Michael, because there's 2 things happening. One is the Synod General Assembly in October 2024. And the second thing is the synodal conversion of the church, which is a work of a generation, you know. So we want to move past October as well to say, how can we use these kinds of spaces to encourage more and more people to be part of conversations like this? And what would that be like?
Yes, yes. No, I think that's a really key point that just to hear you describe some of these meetings that have been set up, I've been saying this, they seem like their own reward in many ways, regardless of what comes out of things eventually. They do feel like they're bringing people together and they're just weaving these new relationships and moments of communal discernment that I think are important for their own sake. So I think it's great that you're providing the platform. And there's maybe 2 ways to kind of expand that idea. I'd love to hear you mentioned this idea of the global church and how Ignatian Encounter Ministry has changed your perspective of what the global church is or how to participate in a global church. I mean, it's really, we have a lot of collaborations at TAC with people in Europe, or, you know, I'm in touch with people all over, and it does feel like kind of an emerging moment. So maybe you could speak to that and how the platform works with that.
Yeah, you know, I think I was really blown open in many ways by coming to Rome, and that was one of my goals, really, was to get outside of my limited lens of church. You know, I spent my whole life in the United States in this particular kind of church environment, and that was what the church meant to me. Coming to Rome and experiencing the universal church here, where there are people from every continent on earth who are all Catholic, and I got to really share faith and be in deep conversations with them, deeply impacted my understanding of who I am as a Catholic and what it is I participate in, what truly the body of Christ really means. So I really feel committed. I think it developed a new commitment within me to try to give that experience back to other people in new ways, and recognizing that this digital space has no boundaries, that we can be in touch with each other, which, you know, might make some bishops a little nervous, but it's the reality of the digital world. We can gather people together and give them this experience of the universal church, which, you know, we talk about it in the creed. We all say that we believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church, but most of us never really get to experience this universal church in which we participate. So the hope is that spaces like this might actually give people an experience of a treasure of their faith that really is our inheritance. It's part of who we are, but we've never really we've only touched the surface of what the possibilities are in those kinds of relationships, and how that deepens our own faith by being a part of that. I know I see Joe Healy here, who knows this very, very well, and many others who have experienced that and want to spread that out even further. So I've just gotten a little taste of it, and I just can't wait to give it away to more and more people.
Yes, it changes one's prayer life to know, maybe have this relationship with someone in East Africa or someone in Asia or something. It's like there's a, you know, even if you're dialoguing through this interface, it's still you're in touch with each other's lives and your faith and faith sharing, and it's yeah, it does deepen the prayer life in its own unique way. So that's
Yeah.
really special. And maybe kind of another way to think about the Ignatian Encounter Ministry moving this idea of moving beyond just 2024 into the synodal conversion of the church. Could you speak about other applications of I'm thinking we have a special interest in small Christian communities at today's American Catholic, and I know we've spoken before about I know you have some experience with small faith sharing groups and how this technology could be scaled to something like that and kind of open up other synodal spaces within the church. How you see it expanding.
Yeah, I think this could be used in a lot of different ways. As a CLC member, which is really a small faith community, we use it all the time. And well, let me give you my best example of this. When the pandemic started in March of 2020, I was working at St. Francis Xavier Parish in Manhattan, where we had a small faith sharing group every week. We had a CLC group, and we would break open the scriptures and we would talk about it and even use this model of conversation in the spirit. We then moved that online and started having Zoom conversations. And over the course of that time of pandemic that we all went through, it wasn't just parishioners at St. Francis Xavier anymore. We were gathering people from all over the United States who found us and who are still with us. And we gather every single Saturday. We read the scriptures together. We break into small groups. We have spiritual conversation around the scriptures. And it's become a real faith community. So I think one of the things, even in uh, today's press conference, they were talking about expanding the digital ministry. And I think that these ideas and practices could really help form small faith communities online in a digital format. As I said, breaking out the boundaries that we all share, that people can come together. I think it's important that people come together in small groups and have this conversation, an intimate conversation, which really can lead to deep moments of conversion for people.
Yeah, just to have that set opportunity to break open the word together.
Yeah.
It's just it's a place to find it, which is a beautiful place to start. Um, so we've looked at kind of the infrastructure of Ignatian Encounter Ministry and some of the ways that it's branching out. And I'm thinking about the global church. I mean, there's so many rich kind of generative ideas here. And I know that you and I have talked a bit about this idea of the learning church.
Mm.
And one thing I think that's coming out of this is this. I'm very inspired by these multi-author synthesis documents, and I'm wondering if there's potential here for a new way to report out from these conversations where we could think about discerning together and maybe publishing these things in different environments and letting people know here's what the church is thinking. It might not be doctrine, but it might be emerging doctrine. Who knows? So what are some of your dreams for how this is going to take shape and how we're going to be a learning church together? I mean, that's kind of a broad question, but it seems
Yeah,
like a lot on the horizon. Yeah.
Well, I think, I was really inspired by the One Synod document that came out for the continental stage, enlarging the space of our tent, which in many ways was it's a remarkable document because it was a synthesis of these voices from all over the church. It was a different kind of ecclesial document. I've read a lot of encyclicals by popes that are written by one guy, and that gives us one point of view of the church. And it really comes from a very particular kind of understanding of ecclesiology and theology, that God is speaking to the Pope and the Pope is writing down what he hears and, sending it out to all of us because he's the prime discerner for the entire church. Well, I still think that there's some truth to that as well and importance to the role of the Pope. All of us have a role within that discernment. So when you read that document, it's very hard to criticize because you're just hearing voices from all over the world speak their own truth from their own place about what's important in their lives and in their faith. It's a profound document. And I think that we can find new ways to create and share those voices with one another. This was really the question that got me into this a long, long time ago as a student. I know that the church teaches a lot, but it seemed that it was only one directional. That the church was teaching and we were learning. They were the teacher, we were the student. This only happens in one direction. You can become a teacher, I suppose, but it's still one directional. But what is it like when we all become learners, and how does that happen? What processes can we use, and what spaces and ways of learning exist where we can learn more? Again, if we believe that Christ is alive and with every Christian, in fact, if we follow Karl Rahner, Christ is alive and trying to communicate with every single human person by the fact of being a human person. So how can we gather some of that wisdom of what God is doing in the lives of people and learn from that as a church?
Yes.
And the bishops play a very important role in that as being discerners and creating the space for all of us to do that. But it's not an us versus them idea. Part of the role of the bishop is really, I think, to create these spaces for discernment. And to be the chief discerners, but the chief discerner isn't just the only discerner. It's the one. It's the those that create the space for all of us to discern together.
Yes.
And that's what my hope is for a lot of these synodal spaces.
It flows both ways. I was just reading, I think it was in Leonardo Boff's book about who will evangelize the bishop. It doesn't always flow this way. It has to flow back. Someone has to be responsible for, returning that teaching or reflecting it back. So I think that's a really um, important thing to remember in this moment of the synodal church.
Yeah.
Um, yeah. And
There's
also,
also a point in too, if I could just say this, it's almost like unchaining God and allowing God to actually do new things. We say that, that like, how can God ever do new things? How do we learn about the new ways that God is calling us to if we don't really listen? When I was in the difference between West Virginia to me and the East Coast Church in many ways is that those in that experience in rural ministry were very, very open to these kinds of listening processes. It was different than sort of the church triumphant that was sort of on high and coming down. It was a much more circular church. And I think it had space to experiment and try new things and be open to new ways. When you're hardened your categories, there's no way for God to get in. It's almost like Leonard Cohen, like you need the cracks because that's how the light gets in. So I think we need to look for the cracks in the church and realize that that might be exactly where the Holy Spirit's trying to get in.
yes, and that goes to the idea that's been explicitly stated in the synodal invitation to go to the margins of the church, even to lapsed or non-affiliated Catholics, or perhaps non people who don't profess a particular creed, and just listen, just be open to learning and listening. The two pieces go
Yeah.
together. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Um, you mentioned new ways just then. It might be a good pivot to some of your upcoming events. If you could fill us in on how people might want to get involved. We have the New Ways Ministry event coming up, I believe, on March 21st, and the facilitator training. Maybe you could also speak a bit about what if, people might be inspired to become facilitators, what that role looks like, or just how can people get involved with this?
Yeah, thanks. Well, thanks for giving me the space to plug that because we
Yeah.
definitely could always use facilitators. So we do have a facilitator training coming up next week on March 20th. Our facilitator trainings are 90-minute trainings that we take people through our process. Our process is very easy. We're not training people in a 2-year process to become process facilitators. We give people scripts that they can follow. Those scripts change depending on that first question I told you about. But I want facilitators to feel comfortable walking through this process, modeling it and guiding it. I think it's important as we begin to try to spread out this new movement. I'll call it a movement in the life of the church. That we create a basic standard almost of what a conversation in the Spirit process might look like. So it's not the most complex. It might not fit every situation, but it's pretty general and it's pretty easy to use. So we want to give people a tool that they can use and that they can then take back also to their local communities and replicate it in their local communities. So we train facilitators in the hope that they'll help us in our online format, but we also give them all the tools that they need to go back next week and do it in their own parish with their own small faith groups as well.
Wonderful. And
So
that's
that's,
that's
oh yeah.
yeah.
Then you also wanted me to talk about the 21st too, right?
Yes, yes. If you could give people the details or where they want to go to find out more information, we'll put
Yeah.
it on the event page as well, but you can share
Okay.
now. Yeah.
Sure, sure. Yeah, so this is a synod consultation. It's particularly for LGBT Catholics and allies and friends to talk about the particular needs of this marginalized group within the church, which, as you said, is a real focus of this synod, is to reach out to the peripheries, and in fact, a key of synodality. is to reach out to the margins. And this is certainly a particularly marginalized group within the life of the church to understand their experiences. So they'll be having their conversation the day after our facilitator training on the 21st. And that happens, I think it's 7:30 p.m. Eastern time. And that also is a 90-minute conversation. Our facilitators will be guiding those groups. I think there's almost 200 people that are signed up right now.
Wow.
And we could always use more facilitators. And that the hope is that if people can come and be trained on the 20th, you can jump right in and be a facilitator on the 21st. We also sometimes people we take notes as well, so we have note takers and facilitators, so we can divide those roles up as well. Like if you're like, I don't want to be a facilitator and a note taker, sometimes we can go in 2 by 2, so that's also an option.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
Good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just to say or lift up this idea. I liked what you said a minute ago about creating some of these standards to start around facilitation and because that excites me because then it's becoming this is like an emerging ministry within the church, within kind of a synodal church that this is, oh wow, this is something new we have to learn, and here's the skill set, and I think it points to what you're doing. So that's
Yeah.
it's great to
And it's
see.
not, it's not the only way to do it. I'm sure that there's going to be more and better ways to do it, but it definitely takes you through it, the 3 rounds of conversation and is very clear, hopefully. And we're also doing this in multiple languages. So, I think I have this translated now in about 10 languages, and we hope to add more.
Nice, nice. Well, I want to make sure we have time for if folks have questions or comments, or if people are inspired to share anything or questions for Robert, please feel free to put your little electronic hand up, and I'm happy to turn the floor over to the group. We have Father Joe. Yes. Please unmute yourself too, Father Joe.
Thank you, Robert, for your very clear presentation, as always, as always.
Thanks, Joe.
Cardinal Gresh announced that he has several canon lawyers in his office in Rome, in his synod office, working specifically on changes in canon law. And if I could ask you, please, specifically related to parish pastoral councils. It's clear from the flow of the first session last October that the new canon law is going to make parish pastoral councils obligatory, just as they are for the finance councils, the parish finance councils. But when the rubber hits the road, it's a question of what is the design of the new parish pastoral council? How much of the parish pastoral council will be consultative and how much is deliberative, especially in our traditional church where some pastors feel they are the king and that the final decision is made with them. What do you see happening so that the parish pastoral council members can be deliberative, namely be involved in decision making? Thank you.
Yeah, wow, Father Joe, you know exactly how to hit the right buttons. You went right for it. You went right for it. This is a critical issue. So Canon 536 has to do with parish pastoral councils. And what's most interesting to me, and this is just my perspective, is Canon 536 paragraph 2. I always said if I could change one line, one word in canon law, it would be first of all, the word only. So that paragraph 2 says parish pastoral councils are consultative only. First of all, the word only is a diminutive word. You're already, as you know, that consultative means less than something else. And that other word is deliberative. So if I thought I would be sufficient if they just cut out the word only and at least give some credibility and importance to what consultation truly is. But now I'm more and more convinced that they may need to change that word from consultative to deliberative. And if you take out the word simply 2 words, consultative only, and change it to deliberative, that changes the entire function of the parish pastoral council and the relationship between the pastor and the faithful in many ways. There's something called, and if anyone's from Philadelphia, there's something called trusteeism that I learned about in Philadelphia. I'm not going to do a whole history lesson, but basically when I went into work in the Church of Philadelphia and I worked in parish pastoral councils, they said we have to avoid the specter of trusteeism, which was a time in Philadelphia history where trustees built their own parishes and hired their own priests and told the priests what to do. And they said, oh, this is too Protestant. And they, instead of correcting that in any other way, they just simply abolished trustees and said, we're never going to have anything like that. There's Cardinal Coco Palmieri, who's here in Rome, put in a proposal to change that word. So I'm not the only one who's thought about this. There's a cardinal here that's working very closely with the synod who has brought this to the floor and said, can we talk about this? And I don't know what it would look like, but I can certainly tell you it would change the relationship between clergy and laity, and it would take away the, how can I put it? The tyrannical monarchy of a clergy that can listen to consultation, hear from the lay people, and then do the exact opposite of what they say without any regard. I think it's undignified that you can simply dismiss the entire body of the church and only go with one member of the body of Christ, as opposed to listening to all of them and having to struggle through it. That's my short answer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you. I see John next and then Audrey. So John, if you'd like to unmute yourself.
Hi, Michael and Robert. I want to thank you both for two terms that I will use from now on: evangelizing the bishops and unchaining God.
All right.
And Joe, for the last question, mine is somewhat related. Bob, are you aware at all, were any of the bishops called out for denying the synod? And we know so many, and or rewriting the response from the synod for their archdiocese?
I don't know. I honestly don't know. How do I want to answer this, John? I think that so I met with Sister Nathalie Bequat today, and she had some very interesting things to say, and we asked her some very hard questions about resistance. And she said, you know, we knew from the very beginning that there's going to be resistance around synodality. That doesn't surprise us. We expect this to happen. It's how graciously we handle that and assume that there's going to be, as Michael said earlier, will be early adopters. There will be people that look and see, and there will be people that dig their heels in. And none of those people that are digging their heels in are not going to stop this. So there was, for instance, one cardinal I knew that was at the October assembly who simply stood up in the assembly hall and said, "This is not a real synod with you lay people here," and walked out. And you know what happened? The synod just continued right along. So I think the synod will continue to move forward. The thing that I think is so unfortunate, though, John, is that the people in those dioceses are being deprived of being a part of this incredible movement and forward-moving motion of the Holy Spirit in the life of the church. And it's very sad, and there's not very much that we can do about it right now, except use digital means like this to provide opportunities for people to have consultation. When we were doing the facilitator trainings back in 2021, there was a woman from Miami. Yeah, I actually said it. I said a place. That's where she was from. And she said, I came on here because I've heard about this synod, but I didn't hear about it from anybody in my diocese. No one's listening to me. Will someone just listen to me? And I had 300 people on that call, John, and we were all trying to get through a 90-minute training. I asked permission of all 300 to say, could we just stop and listen? And we all just stopped and listened to her story. And it was so healing for her to be really heard by these people that were on the call. And I think creating spaces like this, people just want to be heard, and we need to create spaces for them. And I think eventually people will come along.
That's great. That you point right there, Robert, to the keeping our eye on the joy of the process. I like how you say it's going to continue on, and we just have to just keep looking ahead and finding those moments of illumination, like you just pointed to. That's a great story. And thank you, John, for your question.
Thanks, John.
Audrey, good to see you. If you'd like to unmute and. Oh, Audrey,
I can't hear you.
We can't hear you for some reason.
Hmm.
all?
Oh,
there
you
we
go.
are.
You're good.
Oh, okay.
You're good now.
I have to preface the question with an observation. Richard McBride said after Vatican II that it was not the people who were going to resist Vatican II who were the problem. It was the people who would say that it really didn't change anything. Now, we're having an experience here in Baltimore City where within our city limits, we have 57 churches and we have to go down to 19.
Wow.
And they have the bishop who's in charge, the auxiliary bishop in charge of this has had had several times where he's invited anyone to come and to talk, not to talk, but to do what we've perceived to be meaningless exercises, that they collected a lot of information. And then it goes up on another level to parish leaders and priests. It's being called a totally synodal process. And in fact, there hasn't been that kind of deep listening. So my concern is that what we're having now is a co-opting of the term without understanding it, what it could mean, its potential. So Robert, when you talked to Julia at the USCCB and she came to one of your trainings,
Yep.
I can't believe she wasn't converted. But has she been able to talk to anybody else in the staff there to do this kind of presentation to the bishops so that they can begin to see the potential in their own diocese?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I can't speak for Julia, and I don't know what happens inside of the USCCB. I think that, yeah, I agree with you, Audrey, that there are people who are misrepresenting synodality, and I think it's it distresses me, and it distresses me for several reasons. One is that you see this behind me. This is a curtain. Yeah, by my window. This is what we used to call processes like this. We used to call it window dressing. You know, that we're just putting up window dressing to make it look pretty, and somehow bishops, certain bishops that I've worked with, I won't speak about the Archbishop of Baltimore. I have no idea. But there are some bishops that think like, oh, we'll just make it look pretty, and everybody will just assume that it'll work really, really well because they won't see past the curtain. They'll just see the window dressing. And the fact is, it's not true. You know, this is happening in many places where, you know, yes, I understand that there's a need to consolidate parishes. And when I was in Brooklyn and we had to consolidate parishes, I said to the bishop, look, bishop, people are adults. They deal with money every day. They know what a budget is like. They understand that when the building is falling apart, something has to happen. They understand declining numbers, and they understand this. They're adults. Treat people like adults. Go to them, explain the situation to them, listen to them, ask them for solutions. This is only going to help you. Do it in the real way. If we don't do that, we know that the way that you do this matters. So if you don't do that, if you simply go in and have a sham process and then put out the answers that you think you want already without having to listen to people, we know that you lose about 2/3 of Catholics through that process, because they will go to other places, they'll stop going, or they will go anywhere except where the bishop tells them to go, just in defiance. You know, so we can play these games and we can pretend that we're being synodal or being consultative because we use the word and we're trying to put up nice window dressing, but people know and can sense when they're being heard and truly listened to, and when they're truly being treated as partners in the developing the future of the church, and when they're not. And people can vote with their feet, and they are voting with their feet. So the danger here is, unlike what was happening with Richard McBride and the time after Vatican II, where we had burgeoning numbers of Catholics, that's not true anymore, especially after the pandemic. People, if it's not the real deal, people are going to walk away, and there's a lot of other good options for them. So they play these games at their own peril. My short answer.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, it's again, it's just finding these other avenues of participation, and just like Ignatian Encounter Ministry is providing, and just staying optimistic about these connections that are being forged. And Audrey, thank you for invoking Father McBride. He was from the Archdiocese of Hartford. He's very special to us at TAC, so it's great to hear his name. Any other questions or comments from folks? I know it's a little late in Rome, so we want to be respectful of Robert's time, but I want to leave the floor open for any last comments.
Michael?
Yes, John.
Yeah. So Robert, the software, I'm interested in terms of how the reporting takes place. Do you have a reporter? Is that correct? In each group?
Yeah, sometimes
A recorder, rather,
the
recorder.
facilitator can be the reporter, or sometimes we divide those roles if people need some assistance.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And then how is that data, that communication massaged to get to the top level?
Okay, so first of all, we have a note-taking app that we've developed. So the facilitator, the note taker, has that app, and we ask the questions, and that note taker is taking them in real time. They have a split screen. They have like the Zoom screen on one half, the notes on the other half. At the end of that, they share their screen with the group to say, this is what we're reporting, and it's, to be transparent, to say, all right, does everybody in the group agree that this is what we want to report? Everybody says yes or no, change my words, whatever. And they have to agree on that first, because we don't want to submit something on behalf of someone without them seeing it. So then when they submit it, when the facilitator submits that, it all gets pulled back in like a Google form. It gets pulled into like an Excel spreadsheet. And then usually what I would do afterwards, or sometimes we use some other consultants that we work with, they'll code that data. So they'll go through and begin to identify top themes within that data. So there is a top level report, but whoever the host is, the bishop, the pastor, whoever's the meeting organizer, they'll get the entire report and our top line coding as well.
Very good.
Thank you, John, for clarifying that. Yeah, and I can speak as someone who's participated. The software worked very well. I was very impressed with the way the note-taking feature, because sometimes it's hard to consolidate everything, and it did it in a way, and they shared it with us as members of the group, and we could preview it, and it was just a nice way to have our ideas collated. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, again, I know it's a few hours ahead in Rome, so and I know
I think Pat Brinkle might have a question.
Oh wait, I'm sorry, I didn't see the electronic hand. Thank you for pulling that up.
It wasn't. It was a real hand.
Okay, much better. Now I've got the full view, so I apologize. I really apologize for that. Thank you. Please go ahead.
I do not have a question. I just want to thank Bob, and we miss him here. But I know he's doing really great work over there. But I just want to say that the fruit of your work in the Diocese of Brooklyn and Queens can be felt to this day. You've left your mark, and it can be felt. I like what you say, and that's really because there's so much less people in the pews since COVID. People are getting used to following Mass, online, and they're not actually coming to Mass. So having this global conversation, I think, is a real gift that you're giving everybody. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Pat.
Thank you, Patricia. And again, our apologies for the oversight, but thank you. I'm glad you shared. Thank you so much. Pat, please.
I just have a quick clarification, and I don't know if I missed it or not, but did you say what time the training was on March 20th?
I did not. Thank you, Pat. The training is later because we're bringing in people from the West Coast as well. So it's 8 p.m., 8 to 9:30 Eastern time. And I think, Michael, you have the links if people want to register for that.
I do. We will put those. We're going to have the recording up within a couple days with an event page, and we'll have all the links so people can find that info.
Great.
And I'll send it out to everybody that registered. So
thanks for the question too, Pat.
Wonderful. All right. Well, this has been very inspiring and instructive and informative and all those great words. And Robert, thank you so much for taking some time this evening to be with us from Rome and sharing, some of your journey and what brought you to form Ignatian Encounter Ministry and all the great work you're doing. And I think it's opening up new avenues in the synodal church. And I think we all feel that. So it's much appreciated.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for hosting this, and thank you everybody for coming. And please check out our website, Ignatian Encounter Ministry .org. And you can see what's going on there. And you can even donate. We're a new 501c3 organization. So I'm really excited about that too.
Excellent. Do check that out. Well, thank you all. We'll be in touch with further events, and God bless.
Great. Thank you all. Thank you so much.